Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are doing amazing. So let's dive into today's daily challenge on Leetcode and look what's there. So we have this set matrix zeros question. Given an integer array matrix, you need to determine if an element is 0, you need to set the whole row and columns to 0. So in this manner somehow, and the examples are pretty clear and straightforward. You can understand how you need to solve the problem. So if you think this is an interview question, right? This won't come in an online assessment, so you need to follow the instructions which is given by the interviewer. Could you devise a constant space solution? So you need O of 1 solution. So yeah, if you try to see that, if you are thinking by any chance that I whenever I encounter a 0, if in place I turn all the rows and columns, corresponding rows and columns to all zeros, then it will be a mistake, because when you traverse to the next cell, for example, you will find a 0 there and you will try to set the 0 to the column again. So that's a very bad idea. You should not do that. You might also be thinking that I will save all the coordinates of zeros, like this is of the coordinate 0, 0, this is 3, 0. In this way you save all the coordinates in some other vector and then iterate through those coordinates, and then you can just set the rows and columns to 0. So you can see that the maximum number of such coordinates will be O of m into n, so the space complexity will go O of mn. So similarly, if you are thinking that I will save some states somehow or the other using some other vectors, so that is not of O of 1 complexity, so that is not an in place operation. You are using some other vectors. So how to perform that in place operations, let us just try to understand together. So yeah, we have it. So we have some matrix. Okay, we have a matrix. In some places we want to modify it in place. In some places we have some digits 2, 3, let's say 4. Here we might have some 0. Here we might have some 0. Let's say here we might have a 0. And in the other places we do have some values. Okay, the other places we do have some values, and this is the, let's say, first column, first row and first column. They might also have some zeros. Okay, so what you can do is that first you iterate through the first row only and check if it has a 0. If it has a 0, save it in a variable, like in a bool variable of the, let's say, first row. If it has a 0, let's say save it as 1, otherwise 0. Okay, and similarly in the column also, first column. Then what you can do, you treat this submatrix as a separate matrix and treat these things as a markers. Okay, so whenever you find a 0, let's say you find this 0, you are iterating through this one from 1 to n, 1 to m and 1 to n, you are iterating like this. Whenever you find a 0, you set this 0 and this 0, the corresponding row and the corresponding column, you set it to 0. What does this mean? So whenever so suppose you are here, you see that here it is always already 0, so you no need to make it 0. You set the different place 0. Okay, then you encounter this 0, you set the corresponding uh, header and the corresponding leftmost column portion to be zeros. So whenever, after all the processing, what you need to do is that you can simply iterate through the first row and the first column, check if it is 0. If it is 0, just set all the row column to 0. You're iterating a row, and if you are encountering some zeros, you set all the columns to 0. Okay, and then when you are iterating a column, and if you encounter a 0, set all the elements of that row to 0. So you are understanding, right? In each place I am just checking which row and which column, the ith row and jth column, I am marking those as separate entities. I'm marking those as separate entities, and at the end I will just iterate through the first row and the first column. Whichever I will find 0, I will make the whole column or the whole row to be 0. And at the end, if there are some pre-existing zeros here, then this whole row and this whole column has to be 0, right? So this information we can get through here. So by storing zeros here, we are losing the you might think we are losing the information of the first row and first column, but the information of the first row and first column, I have already saved it. Okay, the first row, if the first row initially contains some zeros, it will be 1, and the whole row will be 0. We will iterate and make the whole row 0. If the first column initially has some zeros, I will also again iterate and make it zeros. So let's just try to do the coding part. I think it's really clear by now. It will become more clear as we go. So I have this n and m, and initially what I will do is initially I will keep some bool flag, right? Bool if row equal to false and flag column equals to false. Okay, so what I will do is that I will iterate through this value and see if matrix of I0, if it is 0, then say tell me that first row is true and break it. Just 1 0 is enough to subset all the row, all the zeros of that corresponding row. Similarly, if I make it something like j, if I make it something like j, and this to m and this to 0 and this to j, so this column I can set it to 0 again. So first row and first column I am using it as a marker, so I am losing the information. That is why I am storing the information initially, and then what I will do next is use I equal to 1 to n and use j equal to 1 to n m, and check now if you see that if matrix of ij is equal to 0, now what you can do is that you can simply go to matrix of I0 and set it 0. You can also go to matrix of 0j and set it 0. So yeah, you have the markers ready now. What you need to do is just iterate through the first row now. To iterate through the first row. Okay. And you leave out the first cell. Yeah. So if you have something like if you see matrix of I0 is 0, what you will do, you will simply iterate through the j, iterate through the j starting from 0, j less than m, j plus plus, and you will set matrix of ij to be 0. Okay, so this is the part where I am doing. If I am finding some I0, if I am finding some I0 to be 0, so it means that if I am finding in anything in the column to be 0, I am iterating through that particular row and making all zeros. I am iterating through that particular row and making all zeros. Okay, similar thing I can do it for the other way around. I will iterate through all values of m and go through all values of I and see if here if it's j is 0, then I will set the ij to 0. Okay, now I need to set the first row and the first column. So if the first row had anything, if the first row had any zeros, then the whole column need to be set to 0. So for int I equals to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. What you can do is matrix of I0, you can set to 0. Correct? Similarly, if anything you find first column to be 0, then you can iterate through them and make it all 0. So yeah, that's all. We don't need to return anything, just need to set the matrix in place, and the function is of type void. If I try to run this, let's check if there is an error. So yeah, there will be an error here because of this j thing, and here also because of this j iterator. Let's try to run it. We are getting a runtime error. Let's try to check why is there a fault. So here again we have this variable j set. So some variable mistakes. So we have it. Let's try to submit it. So yeah, we have got the accepted thing. You can see the runtime complexity and the memory complexity are both quite good. So yeah, this was an interview problem. You need to know the optimal method, optimal approach. Otherwise, you may not get good feedback from the interviewer. He may ask you to do it in constant space complexity also. And if you see, the time complexity is also not much. Just because we are writing a lot of code doesn't mean the time complexity is much. Here I am using a single for loop only for the first row, and here I am, so in whole of this portion of the code I am just doing an O of mn time complexity also, not much. So yeah, that's all for this problem. This was more or less a medium easy problem, you can say, for today, but the optimal approach you need to think quite a little bit. So yeah, that's all for today, and I hope your day is going to be really easy. Thank you so much.